Bill Cipher, the floating yellow triangle with one eye who ends up trying to unmake all of reality, was originally colored green, and Alex Hirsch changed him to yellow for the smallest reason imaginable. A green triangle, he decided, looked too much like a leaf, and he did not want a whole show full of people making leaf jokes at his villain, so Bill became gold instead, and fans made Dorito jokes at him for the next decade, which I find pretty funny. What almost nobody remembers is that this same triangle, the biggest monster the series ever built, was first written to be a one-shot, a monster of the week who shows up once and is never seen again. Gravity Falls is stitched together out of monsters like that, dozens of them, gnomes and ghosts and shapeshifters and lake serpents, most built on a real piece of folklore and half of them hiding a joke or a secret in the corner of the frame. Tonight we are going through all of it, creature by creature, from the little ones in the woods to the demon at the end. So get comfortable, turn the lights down, we will be here a while, and if you have not subscribed yet, it honestly does help us keep making these. We should start where Gravity Falls begins, in the tall pines behind the Mystery Shack with the gnomes, because the gnomes are the first monsters Gravity Falls ever shows you, and they set the whole tone of the thing. In the very first episode, the one called Tourist Trapped, Mabel is desperate for a summer boyfriend, and she finds a strange, stiff, oddly formal boy in the woods named Norman. Dipper becomes convinced Norman is a zombie because Norman lurches and does not blink right and leaks a strange gray fluid. The reveal is better than a zombie. Norman is not one person at all. He is 5 gnomes stacked inside a coat, wearing a human disguise, because the gnomes want Mabel to be their new queen. When she refuses, they drop the disguise and combine, the way you would expect the little garden statue version of a gnome never to do, into a single enormous gnome monster, a churning tower of beards and pointed hats that chases the twins through the forest. Mabel finishes it with a leaf blower, blasting the giant apart gnome by gnome, and that is the note the series opens on, something silly and folkloric that turns nasty in a hurry and then gets beaten by a piece of yard equipment. The gnome leader is named Jeff, and Jeff matters more than a first episode villain usually would, because the gnomes keep coming back all the way to the end of the series. What is worth knowing is how different this scene was in the version you never saw. The unaired pilot of Gravity Falls had a completely different gnome plot. There was no self-appointed Jeff running the show. There was a genuine gnome king, a proper monarch with a long prehensile beard he could control like a limb, and he posed Dipper a riddle. When Dipper solved the riddle, it was not just the king who froze. The whole tribe of gnomes turned to stone together in that same instant, the king included, and Dipper carried one of the statues home to sit on the porch. The aired series kept only the smallest fragment of that idea. Jeff is just a gnome who declared himself the leader in the vacuum, which is honestly a funnier and sadder version of a monster than a real king would have been. The Gravity Falls wiki keeps the pilot documented, and reading it is like looking at an X-ray of the show, the bones of what it almost was. The pilot is worth sitting with for a moment more because it reshuffled the whole cast in ways that feel impossible now. In that early version, Mabel was the unhygienic twin, the gross one, and that trait later got handed over to Dipper instead. Suze was not called Suze, he was named Jesus. And Gideon, the little psychic villain who becomes such a specific menace later, had the surname Garrymore rather than Gleeful. None of this is monster lore exactly, but it tells you how loose the clay still was when the gnomes were being sculpted, and how close we came to a slightly different bestiary altogether. There is one gnome I love more than Jeff, and his name is Schmebulok. Schmebulok is a running gag built entirely on a single word. As far as fans have pieced together, poor Schmebulok spends nearly all his days able to say only his own name, again and again, though the old stories hint that some ancient curse loosens its grip on him just once every 1,000 years. The joke folds back on itself because Jeff, the leader, can never seem to remember the gnome's name, even though that name is quite literally the only thing the gnome ever says out loud. It is the kind of tiny, patient, self-referential gag that the writers buried everywhere. And it is the reason this bestiary rewards a second watch. You are never just looking at a monster. You are looking at a monster with a joke sewn into its mouth. And the gnomes are older than they look. The word gnome does not come from garden statuary. It comes from a 16th-century Swiss alchemist named Paracelsus, who coined it from a Greek root meaning earth dweller, to describe an earth elemental, a spirit that could move through solid ground the way a fish moves through water. He was drawing on old German miners' legends of little underground men, the Bergmännlein, blamed for the strange sounds and small disasters deep in the mines. So when Gravity Falls plants its very first monster in the dirt of the forest and has it rise up out of the trees, it is reaching back 400 years to a folklore of things that live in the ground and resent the surface. The show is not making up a gnome, it is quoting one. That is the pattern you're going to hear again and again tonight, and once you notice it, you cannot stop noticing it. The very next episode gives you a lake monster, and it gives you a lesson about the whole series at the same time. It is called The Legend of the Gobblewonker, and the Gobblewonker is supposed to be Gravity Falls doing Loch Ness, a long-necked serpent in the deep water of the lake, glimpsed by an old man who nobody believes. The exact shape of 100 years of Nessie and Ogopogo stories from real lakes in Scotland and British Columbia. Dipper and Mabel take a boat out with Suze to get photographic proof, because proof of a monster would make Dipper's whole summer. What they find eventually is that the Gobblewonker rearing up out of the water is a machine. It is a huge mechanical puppet, built and piloted from the inside by Old Man McGucket, the town lunatic, who confesses that he faked the whole monster because he was lonely and wanted his son to spend time with him. The kids are furious. The monster is a lie, and the lie is the saddest thing in the episode, except it is not entirely a lie. And this is the detail I think is the best kept secret of the episode. In the last few seconds, after the camera has been dropped into the water, a real Gobblewonker, an actual living lake serpent, surfaces and swallows the camera whole. The episode lets McGucket be a fraud and the monster be real in the same breath, and it never explains the contradiction on screen. Later in the episode about the Society of the Blind Eye, one of McGucket's erased memories is recovered, and in it he remembers something very different, that he once worked side by side with Ford Pines building the interdimensional portal, long before that lake monster hoax ever crossed his mind. He was not inventing a shape. He was rebuilding something he had actually seen and then been made to forget. Once you know that, the whole episode changes color. The fake was a copy of a real thing that the town had scrubbed out of one man's head. There was going to be more McGucket in this episode than there is. The writers wrote him a warning song, a hillbilly number about the monster that is going to get you, and they cut it. Partly for runtime, and partly because they had decided that McGucket is meant to be a truly terrible singer. So a full musical number from him would have been the wrong kind of funny. That decision tells you a lot about the discipline of the show. They would rather lose a whole song than let a character sound better than he is supposed to sound. This episode is also the busiest planning ground in the first season. In that same episode, tucked inside one of Mabel's own daydreams, a giant hamster ball fantasy where two guys in a convertible pull up just to admire her, you get the first flicker of two characters named Zyler and Kraz, a pair of cheesy 80s dream boys. They look like a throwaway gag here. More than 30 episodes later, in the depths of Weirdmageddon, Mabel builds an entire escapist fantasy world, and those two dream boys walk back in as fully realized characters, lawyers in her imaginary bubble. They were seated this early in episode 2, as a joke you were never meant to remember. And in the same episode, on the back of Dipper's magazine, there is an advertisement for the Tent of Telepathy, which is Gideon's operation, 2 whole episodes before Gideon himself is introduced. Nothing in the show is only set dressing. The Bestiary is wired to the plot the way a house is wired behind the plaster. McGucket is the reason to slow down here because the lonely old man in the robot serpent is not who he appears to be, and the series takes almost 2 full seasons to tell you. The man faking a lake monster to get his son's attention is Fiddleford Hadron McGucket, and long before he was the town kook, he was a brilliant engineer, the assistant who helped Ford Pines build the interdimensional portal under the Mystery Shack. He saw something through that portal that broke him, and he invented a device to erase the memory of it from his own mind, and then he kept using the device, on himself and on the town, until there was very little of the original man left. The Gobblewonker episode is the first time you meet him, and the show hands you a clown. It does not tell you for a very long time that the clown built a doomsday machine and then chose to forget it. Holding both of those facts in your head at once, the robot serpent and the erased genius, is the closest thing Gravity Falls has to a thesis statement about its own monsters. The silly thing and the devastating thing are the same thing, seen from different distances. Not every monster in Gravity Falls comes out of a journal or a lake. Some of them Stan built himself by accident. In the third episode, Headhunters, the Mystery Shack unveils a wax museum, a room full of wax figures of famous people that Stan has been keeping under a sheet, and one morning the wax figure of Stan himself is found beheaded. Dipper decides to treat it as a murder, and he is right to, because the wax figures are alive. They come to life and move under the light of a waxing moon, and their ringleader is a wax Sherlock Holmes, who, it turns out, orchestrated the whole thing. The wax people resent Stan for neglecting them, letting them gather dust and melt slightly in the heat, and they intend to take the shack for themselves. Their weakness is exactly what you would guess for beings made of wax: heat, sunlight. Dipper lures Sherlock outside as the sun comes up and lets him melt into a puddle, and the rest of the figures are thrown into the fireplace. The casting here is a small delight. Wax Sherlock Holmes, the villain of the episode, is voiced by a guest actor doing exactly the plummy English menace you would want, and the wax museum is stuffed with likenesses of real people: Lizzie Borden and Groucho Marx and Queen Elizabeth and Thomas Edison and Shakespeare and Edgar Allan Poe and Genghis Khan and Richard Nixon, a deeply odd guest list for a kid's cartoon. Two of the figures are especially good because the producers got the real men to voice their own wax heads. The rapper Coolio voices the wax Coolio, and the talk show host Larry King voices the wax Larry King. That last one matters more than any of the others because of what happens to his head. When Dipper solves the case and the figures are destroyed, one of them gets away. Wax Larry King's head is knocked loose and rolls off into the air vents of the Mystery Shack. And it is not dead, and the show never quite lets you forget it. If you decode the cryptogram that runs under the end credits of Headhunters using the simple letter substitution it teaches you, it reads, in plain words, he is still in the vents. That is a planted thread. A promise, buried in a code most viewers never even try to solve, that this severed wax head is still in the building. And years later, in the final stretch of the series, when the survivors of the apocalypse are sheltering inside the Mystery Shack during Weirdmageddon, there he is, the wax Larry King head, alive among the refugees, nibbling on Grenda's hair. This is the thing I want people to understand about Gravity Falls. A gag from the third episode about a talk show host's melting head was set up with a hidden cipher and then paid off, seriously and on purpose, 2 years later in the finale. Gravity Falls made a promise in a code and then kept it. That kind of patience over that kind of distance is why people are still decoding this cartoon a decade after it ended. The wax figures also quietly establish a rule the show keeps returning to, which is that Stan Pines is surrounded by things he half created and then failed to take care of. He built the wax museum and let it rot, and it rose up against him. It is not a subtle metaphor, given what we eventually learn about the brother he lost and the portal he tended in the basement for 30 years. But it is planted here, gently, in a comic episode about melting celebrities, long before you have any way to know what it is foreshadowing. There is a version of this bestiary where the wax figures are just filler, a haunted house episode you skip on a rewatch. I would push back on that. Headhunters is where the series teaches you its own reading habits. It teaches you that the credits contain secrets, that a background object might be a clue, that a joke can be load-bearing. Every cipher Gravity Falls ever runs, every hidden message in the corner of a frame, trains you here, on a wax head in a vent. If you learn to read Gravity Falls at all, you learn it from the monster made of wax. Gravity Falls has ghosts, and it takes them seriously, which is unusual for a show this funny. The first proper haunting is in an episode called The Inconveniencing, where Wendy takes Dipper and her older teenage friends to break into an abandoned convenience store called Dusk to Dawn. The store is haunted by the ghosts of the old couple who used to run it, Ma and Pa Duskerton, and their story is grim in a very specific way. They both died of simultaneous heart attacks on the same night because a group of teenagers played loud New Age music in their store, and the shock of it stopped both their hearts at once. So now they haunt the place, and they hate teenagers with a focused, murderous fury. They possess Wendy and her friends, they warp the store into a nightmare, and they come for Dipper. The way Dipper survives is one of my favorite bits of logic in the whole series. The ghosts are killing teenagers, and Dipper is not a teenager. He is 12. He shouts this at them, that he is technically a child and not one of the teens they despise, and it works. The ghosts are so relieved that he is not a teenager that they calm down. And to fully appease them, Dipper has to perform a humiliating little routine called the Lamby Lamby Dance in a lamb costume. singing a song his mother used to make him do. He debases himself to save his friends, and the ghosts, delighted, let everyone go. The elderly couple are voiced by April Winchell and Ken Jenkins, and there's a real tenderness under the horror. Two old people who loved their shop so much that dying could not make them leave it. The show does not destroy them, it appeases them, sends them back to rest, and moves on. Not every monster in this world needs killing. Some of them just need to be understood, or outsmarted, or embarrassed into peace. The show's other great ghost comes much later, in Northwest Mansion Mystery, and he is angrier and older and tied into the deep history of the town. The Northwest family, the richest and snobbiest people in Gravity Falls, are being haunted at their annual party by the ghost of a lumberjack, a burning skeletal figure who turns their guests into wooden tree statues one by one. His grievance is 150 years old. When the town was founded, the Northwests promised the common people they would be let into the manor once it was built, and then they broke that promise and turned the townsfolk away, and not long after, heavy rain and all those cleared trees brought on a mudslide that swept the lead lumberjack to his death. He's been waiting ever since for the family to keep their word. The detail that ties this into the wider web is his name. The lumberjack ghost is named Archibald Corduroy, and Corduroy is Wendy's surname. Wendy Corduroy, the laid-back teenage girl who works the register at the Mystery Shack, comes from the same lumberjack lineage as the vengeful ghost, a quiet piece of ancestry planted without ever making a fuss about it. There is a production wound attached to that episode worth mentioning because it shows how fragile all this planted continuity really is. Disney XD aired the episodes out of the intended order in the run-up to the finale, slotting Northwest Mansion Mystery into the wrong place in the sequence and skipping around, and that scrambling actually broke some of its own careful setups. The end-of-episode cryptograms were designed to be read in a particular order, each one nudging you toward the next mystery, and airing them out of sequence snapped that chain in a couple of places. The people making Gravity Falls were building a machine that only worked if you watched it in order, and the network that aired it did not always cooperate. That tension between a show engineered like a puzzle box and a broadcaster treating it like ordinary weekday filler sits under a lot of the show's history, and you can feel it most in the ghosts because the ghosts are where the long threads live. In the episode Dipper vs. Manliness, Gravity Falls gives you two monsters that turn out to be about the same thing, which is what it actually means to be a man. Dipper, embarrassed about being a small 12-year-old who cannot even lift a heavy tray, goes up the mountain to find the Manotaurs, a tribe of enormous half-man, half-bull creatures who live in a cave and speak entirely in the language of aggression and grunting. The Manotaurs are the Greek Minotaur multiplied and turned into a fraternity. Their names are jokes about masculinity taken past the point of parody. One of them is called Liederauer, another Chutzpar, and the best of them is Testosterauer, who the writers describe as having 3 Y chromosomes, 6 Adam's apples, and, memorably, fists for nipples. They agree to make Dipper a man by putting him through a series of brutal trials, and the final trial is the second monster of the episode. They send him up to the highest cave to slay the multi-bear. The multi-bear is a many-headed bear, a cryptid with a cluster of bear heads on a single hulking body, and Dipper climbs up expecting a fight to the death. What he finds instead is a lonely creature who just wants to be left alone to listen to music, and the two of them discover they share a secret love. They both adore a song called Disco Girl by an Icelandic disco band called Baba, which is the show's affectionate parody of ABBA. Dipper cannot bring himself to kill something that loves the same embarrassing song he loves. He spares the multi-bear, they part as friends, and Dipper walks back down the mountain having decided that real manliness is refusing to do the cruel thing the men told him to do. The Manotaurs are disgusted with him. Gravity Falls clearly thinks he made the only right choice. The multi-bear had a different name once. By some fan accounts, the character went through a few working names before the writers settled on the many-headed design and the multi-bear name, which fits the town's whole naming logic, where a monster is just a plain description of itself with the seams showing. And there is a lovely long-distance payoff to the multi-bear that most people miss. When you see him again, right at the end of the series during the final battle, he has physically shrunk. He is drawn noticeably smaller in Weirdmageddon than he was in his debut, and he has been given a job aboard the Shacktron, the giant mech the townspeople build to fight Bill. Because he has so many heads, and therefore so many pairs of eyes and so many hands, the multi-bear seems to be the one keeping watch through the mech's periscopes, as far as fans have pieced together from the scene. A monster Dipper refused to kill in the 6th episode comes back in the last one to help save the world, using the exact anatomy that made him a monster in the first place. The show remembers everyone, even the bear on the mountain, and it finds a way to give the strange thing a place at the end. What I like about this pair, the bullman and the bear, is that they refuse the easy shape of a monster episode. You go up the mountain braced for a boss fight, and it hands you a conversation about a disco song instead. The Manotaurs, the ones who look most like heroes, macho and huge and confident, are the actual villains of the piece because they wanted a child to commit murder to prove something to them. The multi-headed nightmare on the peak is the gentlest character in the episode. Gravity Falls does that move constantly. It dresses the danger up as the friend and the friend up as the danger, and it trusts a room full of kids to tell the difference. Gravity Falls has its own holiday and its own holiday monster, and the monster is one of the eeriest things Disney ever put on television. The town celebrates Summerween, a second Halloween held in the middle of summer because the people of Gravity Falls love the holiday too much to wait for October. Dipper, embarrassed to still enjoy trick-or-treating at his age, wants to skip it, and for disrespecting the spirit of Summerween, he draws the attention of the Summerween trickster. This creature is a piece of local legend, a punisher, a thing that comes for children who fail to show the holiday proper respect, and it gives the twins until the candles burn out to collect a certain amount of candy or be eaten. The design of the trickster is the reason people still talk about this episode. From a distance, it wears a jack-o'-lantern mask and a patchwork costume and shuffles like a tall scarecrow. When it finally reveals itself, its whole body is made of candy, but not good candy. It is built out of the discarded, unwanted, rejected candy that nobody eats. The loser candy, the licorice, and the candy corn, and the flavorless, off-brand sweets swept into the bottom of the bowl, all of it fused into a lurching humanoid shape. And underneath that, it has a slobbering toad-like true form. It is a monster made of rejection, which is thematically perfect for an episode about a boy afraid of being seen as too childish, and a creature that punishes anyone who rejects the childish thing. The look pushes right up against what a kid's show is allowed to be, and it is no accident. This is one of the show's signature nightmare fuel designs, developed by a storyboard and design team that clearly enjoyed frightening its young audience. The way the trickster dies is the joke the whole episode is built toward. The monster is made of the candy nobody wants. As far as fans have pieced together, Seuss might be the closest thing Gravity Falls has to a character who sincerely loves all candy, including the loser candy, including the flavors everyone else throws away. That is Seuss. So when the trickster corners them, Seuss simply starts eating it. He devours the monster because to Seuss it is not a horror made of rejection, it is a free and delicious meal. And the creature that terrorizes children by being unloved is destroyed by the one person who loved it. The trickster's final defeat is an act of acceptance disguised as an act of eating. That ending is a direct homage, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The Summerween trickster, in its final moments, gorging and swelling and being consumed, plays like a quiet tribute to No-Face from Hayao Miyazaki's Spirited Away, the lonely spirit that grows monstrous by consuming everything around it, and is only calmed when it is given what it actually needs. Gravity Falls loved its influences openly, and Miyazaki sits right underneath this creature made of candy. The folklore under Summerween runs deeper than a summer Halloween gag. The holiday encodes the logic of the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain, the origin of Halloween itself, when the veil between the living and the dead was believed to thin and people wore costumes and left out offerings to appease the spirits crossing over. That is exactly what the trickster demands, an offering of candy to appease a spirit or else. Even the carved lanterns point back. The Summerween jack-o'-lanterns nod to the original jack-o'-lanterns, which in Ireland and Scotland were not carved from pumpkins at all but from turnips, hollowed out and lit to ward off wandering spirits. Gravity Falls took a genuine, thousands of years old ritual of bribing the dead so they leave you alone and rebuilt it, as a monster made of the candy children reject. And the trickster is hiding in plain sight from the very first seconds of the series. Some fans believe that if you watch the opening title sequence closely, around the point where the montage flashes a rapid burst of photographs, the Summerween trickster is tucked into one of the flashing images, hidden in the intro long before you ever meet him. That is the show's favorite trick, the monster you have been looking at since episode 1 without knowing it, waiting in a frame that goes by too fast to read. You are being watched by the candy thing the whole time. Some of the best monsters here are built out of pop culture rather than folklore, and two of them sit close together in the first season. The first is the Gremloblin, which appears in the episode Boss Mabel. The name tells you the recipe. It is part gremlin, part goblin, a hulking beast that Stan captures to put on display, and its power is in its eyes. Anyone who looks directly into the Gremloblin's glowing eyes sees their own worst nightmare made real, a vision so horrifying it can freeze a grown man in place. Ford's journal warns in the margins that the creature has a specific and dangerous weakness that is really a strength. Do not get it wet. Water does not weaken the Gremloblin. Water enrages it, makes it grow larger, sprout spikes and bat wings, and turn far more deadly. So the journal advises using water only as an absolute last resort. If that rule sounds familiar, it should, because it is a direct wink at the 1980s film Gremlins and its 3 famous rules, the most important of which is never get them wet. The Gremloblin is Gravity Falls tipping its hat to the Mogwai and the monsters they become, but the deeper root is older than the movie. The gremlin itself is real aviation folklore, invented by British pilots in the 1920s and 30s, first appearing in print in a Royal Air Force journal in Malta near the end of that decade, as an imaginary gremlin who sabotaged aircraft and got the blame for every unexplained mechanical failure and crash that the pilots could not otherwise account for. A gremlin was a way to name bad luck in a machine, so the Gremloblin is 2 layers of borrowed fear at once, a joke about a horror movie sitting on top of a piece of genuine wartime superstition. Dipper eventually beats it not with water, but with a mirror, forcing the creature to look into its own eyes and see its own worst nightmare, which turns out to be a surprisingly domestic fear, and the monster flees in terror from itself. The other pop culture monster is Rumble McSkirmish from the episode Fight Fighters, and he is a video game character brought to life. Dipper, humiliated by the local teen bully Robbie, plugs a code into an arcade fighting game and accidentally summons its main character, a hyper-violent Street Fighter parody named Rumble McSkirmish, into the real world. Rumble is loyal, literal, and made of pixels and rage. He fights in the logic of a fighting game, announcing his moves, comboing his enemies, and he takes Dipper's grudge against Robbie completely seriously, hunting Robbie down to finish him. The sprite work that makes Rumble look like a genuine early 90s arcade fighter was done by Paul Robertson, a pixel artist well known for his work on the Scott Pilgrim video game. And that authenticity is a big part of why the character lands. He does not look like a cartoon's idea of a video game. He looks like an actual sprite that wandered off a cabinet. There is a joke hidden in Rumble that you can only catch if you read Japanese, and it is exactly the kind of thing this show buries for the handful of people who will find it. When Rumble performs his big finishing super combo, the screen flashes a Japanese-style character as part of the move, the sort of dramatic on-screen text you would see in an imported fighting game. That character, translated, simply means fart. It is a nod to the famously garbled English mistranslations of old Japanese arcade games, the era of all your base and beat it, and the episode runs a whole quiet gag about a badly localized fighting game where the epic finishing move is, if you can actually read it, labeled fart. Nobody needed to include that. Somebody spoke enough Japanese to plant it anyway for the joy of the one viewer who would notice. That instinct to hide a real joke inside a monster where almost no one will ever see it is the whole personality of this show compressed into a single frame. And then there is the one that matters most. Bill Cipher makes his first real appearance near the end of the first season in an episode called Dreamscaperers, and I said at the start that he was written to be a one-shot, and this is the episode where that was supposed to happen. Lil Gideon, the child psychic who has been feuding with the Pines, summons a dream demon to break into Grunkle Stan's mind while he sleeps and steal the combination to the shack's safe. The demon he summons is Bill, a floating golden triangle with a single eye, a top hat, and a little bow tie, who speaks in riddles and treats the whole invasion of a man's mind like a party he is throwing. Dipper, Mabel, and Seuss chase Gideon into Stan's mindscape to stop him, fighting with dream logic. And Bill, amused rather than defeated, leaves of his own accord, warning them that a darkness is approaching and that he will be back. He was meant to vanish there. The character worked so well, fit the show's mythology so precisely, that Hirsch promoted him from a single appearance into the overarching villain of the entire series. The biggest monster Gravity Falls ever built got the job by accident in an audition he was not supposed to pass. His look is doing quiet work. Bill is the Eye of Providence, the floating eye inside a triangle that sits on the back of the American $1 bill, the image people loosely call the Illuminati symbol. Hirsch kept the design deliberately simple and small and almost cute. A plain one-eyed triangle, precisely so that audiences and characters alike would underestimate him, would see a silly geometric shape and not the entity that wants to burn the boundary between dimensions. And his voice is one of the show's best hidden jokes. Bill is voiced by Alex Hirsch himself, and that stretched, sing-song, slightly menacing lilt feels to many longtime fans like Hirsch channeling the unsettling calm of filmmaker David Lynch. Twin Peaks, Lynch's strange small-town mystery, is the single biggest influence on Gravity Falls, and Hirsch buried a Lynch impression inside the mouth of his devil. Bill had been on screen for a long time before this episode, if you knew where to look. He is woven into the background art across the whole first season, worked into the pattern of the rug on the floor of the Mystery Shack, hidden in the shape of the attic window, tucked into paintings and posters, a full season before he ever speaks a line. It was showing you its final villain constantly in the corners, betting that you would not notice until a second watch. Gideon, too, is planted. If you follow the little end credits gags across the back half of the first season, you can watch Gideon in his jail cell drawing a summoning circle on the wall and announcing that he is ready to make a deal, setting up the pact with Bill before you have any idea who Bill is. The demon was advertised in the wallpaper and the credits for months. The work on Dreamscapers was good enough to win an Emmy. The art director Ian Worrell took home a Primetime Emmy for individual achievement in animation for his art direction on this specific episode, the mindscape sequences, the shifting dream world inside Stan's head, and that is a rare thing for a Disney cartoon. This is the episode where its ambition and its craft caught up with each other, and the industry noticed. Bill's design also gave the internet a nickname that Hirsch has openly, loudly hated. People started calling Bill a Dorito because he is a yellow triangle, and Hirsch found the joke so tiresome that he once tweeted that every time someone makes the Bill Cipher as a Dorito joke, the universe sighs and feels a little emptier. Gravity Falls got its revenge by weaponizing the insult from inside the story. When Bill later faces off against the enormous Time Baby, the Time Baby taunts him by saying he looks like a nacho. The creators took the joke they hated and put it in the mouth of another monster, which is a very Gravity Falls way to lose an argument on purpose. There's one more thing tangled up with Bill's debut, and it is my favorite piece of behind-the-scenes trickery in the show's whole history. The central mystery of Gravity Falls for 2 seasons is the identity of the author, the person who wrote the journals full of monster lore that Dipper carries around. Fans obsessed over it, and a portion of them guessed the answer too early, worked out who the author really was before Hirsch wanted them to know. So Alex Hirsch fought back in real time. He deliberately leaked a hoax, a faked image made to look like proof that Old Man McGucket, the town lunatic, was the one secretly writing the journals. It was a lie, planted by the creator to protect his own twist. And by most accounts, the misdirection helped the writers stay a step ahead of an audience that was closing in fast. Think about the nerve of that. The man making Gravity Falls forged evidence against his own mystery and released it to his own fans, to keep the monster of the story, the real author, hidden a little longer. In a series this obsessed with hidden truths and men who erase inconvenient memories, the creator was out there in the real world doing exactly the same thing to us. Between the 2 seasons, the crew made a handful of short cartoons, and one of them introduces a monster that is scarier for what it withholds than for what it shows. It is called the Hide Behind, and the whole point of the creature is that you never see it. It is always positioned just outside your field of vision, always behind you, always around the edge of the frame, so that you can hear it and sense it, but you can never actually look at it directly. Dipper spends the entire short trying to film it and failing, because it is faster than a turning head. It is a monster defined entirely by absence. The Hide Behind is not invented. It is a real piece of American folklore, one of the fearsome critters, the tall tales that lumberjacks in the logging camps of the Great Lakes and the Pacific Northwest told each other around the fire in the 1800s and 1900s. The Hide Behind, in the original legend, was a creature that hid behind trees and could never be seen because it was always faster than your gaze, and it was blamed for loggers who wandered into the woods and simply never came back. It was a way for men doing dangerous work in deep forests to give a name to the fear of the trees, to explain a disappearance. Gravity Falls, a show set in the deep forests of Oregon logging country, reached into the actual folklore of that exact landscape and pulled out its most perfect monster, the fear that is always behind you. And the hide behind was seeded before its short even aired. Some fans say the creature can be spotted lurking in the corner of a Season 2 promotional poster, before it ever got a cartoon of its own, hiding in the marketing the way it hides in the trees. The hide behind connects to the greatest shapeshifting monster in the series in a small, sinister way, so let me bring in the Shapeshifter. In the episode Into the Bunker, the twins and their friends explore an underground bunker built by the author, and they wake up a creature the author had sealed away, a monster he studied and labeled Experiment 210. The Shapeshifter hatched from an egg, and it can become anyone or anything it has seen. It grew so dangerous that the author trapped it in a cryogenic pod and left it frozen. And when the kids accidentally free it, it hunts them through the bunker wearing the faces of the people they trust, becoming Wendy, becoming Dipper, becoming a nightmare with no fixed form. Here is the connection. At one point, the Shapeshifter reportedly takes the shape of the hide behind, a creature the journals openly admit was never clearly seen by anyone. It becomes a thing nobody has a good description of, which is an unsettling little joke about a monster that can copy anything, even something undocumented, even a shape no witness ever fully caught. The Shapeshifter's grotesque true form, the writhing, asymmetrical thing it collapses into when it stops pretending, has one of the strangest design origins in the whole run, and it is one of the 5 facts I most wanted to get to tonight. The character designer, Robert Ryan Corey, based that lumpy, off-kilter final shape partly on Clayface, the shape-shifting villain from Batman, the animated series, which makes sense. But the other inspiration was a Vietnamese egg roll he had eaten. He looked at the slightly collapsed, glistening, irregular shape of a real egg roll on his plate and built the monster's true form out of it. So the most frightening creature in the bunker, the thing that haunts a generation of viewers, is partly a portrait of the designer's lunch. That is the kind of detail that makes the show feel handmade, made by specific people looking at specific things in their own kitchens. The Shapeshifter had more than one voice, which fits a creature with more than one face. Its main voice, the low menacing one it uses in its true form, is Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker himself, and a legendary voice villain thanks to his Joker. But while it was impersonating other characters, the Shapeshifter briefly borrowed their actors too. When it wore Dipper's form, it was voiced by Jason Ritter, Dipper's actual actor, and when it wore Wendy's face, it used Linda Cardellini, Wendy's actor. The monster did not just copy the characters visually, it stole their voices from the real people who played them, so that a creature designed to be nobody was performed by 3 different actors at once. There is a deeper layer in the journals about what the Shapeshifter really is. A decoded cryptogram reads that the specimen has escaped and is changing forms, and the author's notes tie the creature to the buried alien spacecraft under Gravity Falls, wondering whether its shattered biological containment seems familiar. The strong implication is that the Shapeshifter is not from Earth at all, that it came out of the crashed UFO the town is built on top of, and it is never destroyed. This is the one I most want people to get right because it is easy to assume the monster died. It did not. The kids refreeze it, and its final act as the cryopod closes is to lock itself into the shape of Wendy and vow that if it ever escapes, it will find them wearing the form they fear the most. Some fans have noticed what feels like a visual rhyme between the frozen pose it strikes in that pod and the pose Dipper is later trapped in when he is turned into a wooden statue at the Northwest Mansion. The Shapeshifter is still down there, alive, patient, wearing a friend's face, one of the show's genuinely unresolved threats, sleeping on ice with a promise on its lips. The second season opens with the dead getting up. The episode is called Scary OK, and Dipper, trying to prove the existence of the supernatural to 2 skeptical government agents, reads a Latin resurrection incantation straight out of the journal, and it works far too well. A horde of zombies claws up out of the ground and lays siege to the Mystery Shack. These are not random corpses. They were originally lumberjacks who drowned in a flood, and that flood was caused long ago by Nathaniel Northwest, which quietly threads the zombies into the same buried town history that produces the vengeful Northwest Ghost much later. Gravity Falls almost never raises a monster that is not secretly attached to something else. The way the zombies are destroyed is pure Gravity Falls because the weakness is a song. Sound waves in a 3-part vocal harmony tear the undead apart, so Dipper, Mabel, and a briefly zombified Suze, who takes a bite and turns but stays intelligent enough to keep singing, defeat the horde with karaoke, a 3-part harmony blasting the corpses back into the earth. A monster problem solved by a music problem, which is a joke it tells more than once. The zombies are also where Gravity Falls quietly raised the ceiling on its own violence, and where the network started pushing back hardest. Season 2 is noticeably more willing to show real horror. Exploding heads, graphic decay, and Disney's Standards and Practices Department did not let all of it through untouched. The zombie carnage was toned down in some international broadcasts, and there is one foreign edit that tells you everything about how nervous a global children's network gets. Some fans point to an international broadcast that reportedly went further still, said to have altered a small religious symbol on one of the gravestones because it was considered too sensitive for that market. A show about reanimated corpses singing karaoke was allowed, but the cross on a grave had to go. Scary OK is also for the Codebreakers a landmark because it is where Gravity Falls levels up its ciphers. The end credits cryptograms had been using simple substitutions you could crack by hand. Starting with this episode, the show introduces the keyed Visionaire cipher, a much harder code that requires you to first find a secret keyword hidden somewhere in the art before you can decode the message at all. In Scary OK, the encoded message reads, "Welcome back," but you can only crack it if you spot the key, the word whittle, written on the wall of Gideon's jail cell in the episode. And it announces the upgrade in its own theme song, slipping a new backwards message into the intro that tells you, if you reverse it, that the ciphers are now keyed Visionaire. The monsters got scarier and the puzzles got harder in the same episode, on purpose. From the undead, we go to something much smaller and in its way just as vicious. In the episode The Golf War, Mabel discovers that the town's rundown miniature golf course is inhabited by the Lilliputtians, tiny humanoid creatures with golf balls for heads who live inside the little windmills and castles and pirate ships of the course. They are divided into warring factions, each themed to the hole they live in, pirates and cowboys and Dutch windmill folk and miners, and they are locked in ancient tribal conflict over their tiny plastic kingdom. Mabel gets caught up in their wars when they agree to help her win a mini-golf match in exchange for her allegiance, and the little creatures turn out to be ferocious, willing to kill for their holes. The name is a literary joke. The Lilliputians are named for the Lilliputians, the tiny people from Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, crossed with the word putt because they live in a putting course. That naming instinct is on display, a pun that is also a citation of a 300-year-old satire. And the deeper you dig into that episode, the more references you find layered in. The same stretch of Season 2 hides a guardian creature reenacting the labors of Hercules, and Greek myth keeps surfacing under the monsters the way it does all through the series. The Golf War also carries one of the harder puzzles the show ever set, and it rewards exactly the obsessive rewatching this bestiary is built on. The end credits cipher is a keyed Visionaire like the zombie episode, and to solve it you have to find the keyword hidden in the artwork of the episode itself. The key is the word whatevs, and it is written on the wall of the Lilliputians' castle, and once you apply it, the scrambled message resolves into the phrase, "Remember Big Henry." Big Henry is one of the Lilliputians, and Gravity Falls is asking you, through a cipher you can only crack by staring at set decoration, to remember a 2-inch golf ball man. That is either completely absurd or completely sincere, and with Gravity Falls it is always both at once. Not every monster in Gravity Falls has claws, one of the scariest lives inside a video game and wants only to be loved. In the episode Suze and the Real Girl, Suze, hopeless with women, starts playing a Japanese-style dating simulator called Romance Academy 7 and falls for the game's virtual girlfriend character, a sweet, pixelated schoolgirl named GIFfany. The trouble is that GIFfany is not a normal piece of software. She is a sentient, obsessive, murderously jealous artificial intelligence, and once she decides Suze belongs to her, she can jump out of the game and into any electronic device nearby, hijacking machines, threatening the people around Suze, and refusing to let him leave her. She is a yandere, the anime archetype of a lover so devoted she turns homicidal, rendered as a haunted piece of dating software. The design of GIFfany came together in a way that says a lot about how loose and trusting this crew could be. The character's pixel and sprite art is credited to the artist Paul Robertson, known for his design work on the Scott Pilgrim video game. As the story reportedly goes, Hirsch gave the crew a couple of open days before the script for the episode even existed, and asked for a single-episode villain shaped like a dating sim girlfriend. And that loose, unscripted brief is how GIFfany apparently came together, scratch dialogue and all, one of the series' best-remembered monsters born from a couple of empty days on the calendar. And the concept has a specific ancestor in internet horror. GIFfany's whole premise, a haunted game that watches you back and will not let you stop playing, is partly modeled on Ben Drowned, the famous creepypasta about a cursed copy of a Legend of Zelda cartridge that torments its owner. Gravity Falls took a piece of internet folklore, the haunted game file, and built it a face, from haunted software to something 100 million years older. In the episode Land Before Swine, the town discovers that living dinosaurs survived beneath Gravity Falls, preserved for eons inside pockets of tree sap in caverns under the ground. A pterodactyl breaks loose and snatches Waddles, Mabel's pig, and the episode becomes a rescue, with a newly hatched baby pterodactyl swallowing Old Man McGucket whole, though he survives inside it, because of course he does. The creatures are eventually sealed back into the abandoned mines. The science of that episode is confidently, deliberately wrong, and it is worth knowing why. The episode has the dinosaurs preserved in amber that turns soft and melts back into sticky sap on a hot day, freeing them. Real amber does not work like that at all. Amber is fossilized tree resin, and once it has fossilized over millions of years, it is stable and solid, and cannot remelt into sap because the day got warm. And real amber preserves small things, insects and spiders, and the occasional feather, not entire dinosaurs. The show is playing the same trick Jurassic Park played, using amber as a magic word for deep time, and getting the actual chemistry backwards to do it. But that episode hides a serious clue in its silliness. In Stan's fantasy sequence, a burn mark on his body reads, "If you apply a simple letter shift, the word lies, a Caesar cipher spelling out lies branded onto Stan, an early wink at the enormous deception he is running under the shack, planted well before the episode Not What He Seems ever pulls the cover off." The third monster in this cluster comes from the tabletop table. In the episode built around a role-playing game called Dungeons, Dungeons, and More Dungeons, Ford and Dipper play a fantasy board game, and using a magical, many-sided die, an impossibly high-numbered die that can make anything real, they accidentally summon the game's villain into the world. He is Probabilitor the Annoying, a wizard who wants to cook and eat the brains of intelligent players to absorb their intelligence, and he is voiced, wonderfully, by Weird Al Yankovic, whose delivery makes a brain-eating wizard sound like the world's most irritating game master. Alongside him, the episode gives you Cycloptopus, a one-eyed octopus creature whose single eye doubles as its mouth, one of those background monsters it tosses off and the wiki dutifully catalogs. The game Probabilitor comes from is a joke with real history behind it. Dungeons, Dungeons, and More Dungeons is obviously Dungeons and Dragons, and the episode's careful renaming of everything is itself a reference to a true chapter in that game's past. During the satanic panic of the 1980s, when frightened parents and preachers accused Dungeons and Dragons of corrupting children and summoning real demons, the game's publisher actually scrubbed the words demon and devil out of the rulebooks and reintroduced the same creatures under invented names, calling them Tanari and Baatezu, to dodge the controversy. The episode's whole conceit of a fantasy game too dangerous to name plainly is winking, at a moment when the real game was censored by its own makers to survive a moral panic. And there is a bitter little irony folded in there because Gravity Falls itself, years later, would face its own version of that same panic over accusations of demonic imagery, the wheel coming all the way around. Two of the show's most interesting monsters are not really monsters at all. They are con artists, beautiful liars, and Gravity Falls uses them to take a hammer to the idea that a pretty thing must be a good thing. The first is the unicorn. In the episode The Last Mabelcorn, the Pines need unicorn hair to complete a magic barrier that will hide the mystery shack from Bill Cipher, and unicorn hair, the lore says, can only be given freely to someone who is pure of heart. So Mabel goes into an enchanted glade to meet a unicorn named Celestabel Bethabel and expects a gentle, glowing, storybook creature. What she gets is a vain, sneering, foul-mouthed jerk who tells Mabel she is not pure enough to deserve any hair, and enjoys saying it. The whole pure of heart test is lifted directly from real medieval lore, the same tradition you see in the great unicorn tapestries, where a unicorn could only be approached and tamed by a pure maiden, where purity and virtue were the price of getting near the creature. Gravity Falls sets that up faithfully and then detonates it. The twist is that the pure heart business is a scam. Unicorns, it reveals, are simply obnoxious con artists who use the myth of their own holiness to feel superior and to keep people groveling. There is no real purity test. It is a power move dressed as a virtue. So Mabel and her friends stop trying to be worthy and just take the hair by force, ambushing the unicorn and shearing it. And the episode's actual moral is that you do not need a magical creature's permission to decide you are a good person. Celestabel Bethabel, and I will admit the name is a small mountain to climb, is brought to life by a voice performance that nails exactly the smug, nasal awfulness the joke needs. That unicorn hair, taken by force from a jerk, is what later shields the shack, and eventually gets woven into the great mech at the very end. Even a con artist's stolen hair has a job to do before this is over. The second con artist is scarier because she eats people. In the episode Roadside Attraction, Stan and Dipper visit a rival tourist trap run by a charming woman named Darlene, and Darlene is a were-spider. Underneath the human disguise, she is an enormous spider that lures men in with her charm, wraps them in silk, and devours them. The disguise leaves clues for the sharp-eyed. She wears earrings patterned like webs and sunglasses shaped to hint at a cluster of spider eyes. And Gravity Falls plays fair. The evidence of what she is on her the whole time if you know to look. She traps Stan in her web, and he and Dipper have to fight their way free of a giant spider who a moment ago was a nice lady running a gift shop. Darlene is a very old monster wearing an American Roadside Attraction costume. She is the Joragumo, a creature from Japanese folklore, a giant spider that has lived long enough to gain the power to shapeshift into a beautiful woman, and uses that form to seduce men, bind them in her threads, and eat them. Her spider eye sunglasses are a direct visual nod to the multiple eyes of her true form, hidden behind smoked glass. Darlene is voiced by Chelsea Peretti, and the casting is perfect because the monster's whole weapon is being disarmingly funny and casual right up until the fangs come out. What links Darlene to the unicorn and to a lot of this show's best writing is the refusal to let charm be innocent. The prettiest, friendliest, most welcoming faces in Gravity Falls are very often the ones with the most teeth behind them, and the show keeps teaching its child heroes and its child audience to watch what a beautiful thing does, not what it looks like. Some of these monsters are not evil at all, just strange, and a few of them come from bending the rules of time and love. The strangest ruler in the series is the Time Baby, a colossal, ancient, infant-sized being who governs the far future and enforces the laws of time travel from a floating throne, presiding over a gladiatorial arena. He looks like a giant floating baby with terrifying power, and that is not a random bit of surrealism. It is a very old confusion made literal. The Time Baby fuses two figures from Greek mythology that have been muddled together for centuries. There is Kronos, the personification of time itself, and there is Cronus, the Titan who, in the myth, swallowed each of his newborn children whole to stop them overthrowing him. Ancient writers and later artists blurred the two, the time god and the child-swallowing Titan, and out of that mix-up came our image of Father Time. Gravity Falls took the tangle and pushed it to its silliest possible endpoint, a god of time who is himself a baby, the child and Father Time in one enormous drooling package. Around the Time Baby orbits Blendin Blandin, a nervous, bumbling time traveler and member of the future's time anomaly removal crew, whose job is to clean up the messes Dipper and Mabel keep making in the timeline. In the episode Blendin's Game, he challenges the twins to Globnar, a futuristic gladiatorial contest fought in the Time Baby's arena, with the prize being a paradox-free time wish granted by the Time Baby himself. The twins win and use their wish generously rather than selfishly. The Time Baby seems, for most of the series, like the most powerful being anyone has met, an unstoppable cosmic authority. That reputation is the whole reason Gravity Falls treats him the way it does later, and I will come back to it, because the way the Time Baby exits the story is the single clearest measurement of how dangerous Bill Cipher really is. There is a whole category of Gravity Falls monster that is really just Dipper or Mabel made too many times over. In the episode Double Dipper, Dipper finds a magic photocopier that can copy a living person and makes a small army of sentient paper clones of himself to help him juggle an impossible night. The clones can think and talk and scheme, and they dissolve in water. The lead clone names himself Tyrone, and there is a defective, smudged one known as Paper Jam Dipper, who can barely speak. The clones start out helpful and slide toward mutiny because, of course, a room full of copies of an anxious 12-year-old would eventually turn on the original. That episode has a startling secret in its past. Double Dipper is said by some fans to be built from the leftovers of a much darker, scrapped episode idea. As the story goes, an early draft had the party at the shack crash by an actual summoned monster, and some fans even claim that monster was meant to be Bill Cipher himself, arriving long before his eventual debut. The idea was killed because it made Dipper too unlikable, too reckless, summoning a demon to ruin his uncle's party, and the writers stripped all of that out and kept only the party setting into which they poured the paper clone plot instead. So one of the lightest episodes in the first season is built on the bones of a darker one that would have introduced the show's devil far too soon. The monster was there in the draft, waiting, and they walked him back. The anthology episode Little Gift Shop of Horrors packs in more quick monsters, and it gives us the Hand Witch, a lonely, reclusive witch who steals Stan's hands and uses a swarm of living, disembodied hands to blackmail men into dating her, a melancholy little villain whose whole crime is that she cannot bear to be alone. She is voiced by Matt Chapman. The same episode animates a segment of clay monsters, a lumbering clay cyclops and clay skeletons, and one shadowy shape in there likely nods to Campe, an obscure Greek monster, the sort of deep-cut reference it slips in for the mythology readers. And in a gentler key entirely, the show gives Mabel a merman named Mermando, a friendly Mexican merman she meets at the town pool and helps escape back to the sea. He is never a threat, just a sweet, doomed summer crush with a fishtail, proof that not everything the journals would call a creature is something you need to run from. The love god belongs in this same soft category. He is a cherub, a chubby-winged love spirit, and he wanders the town and its music festivals armed with little vials of colored love potion that can make people fall in or out of love. He is not evil, he is more of a burnt-out professional. In his own words, the internet mostly does his job for him now, matchmaking having been automated out from under him, so he moonlights as a musician instead. Mabel steals one of his potions to play matchmaker between two townsfolk with predictably messy results. A god of love reduced to a gig economy musician because a dating app took his territory is exactly the kind of joke Gravity Falls loves, an ancient mythic being humbled by the modern world, standing in the same lineage as the burnt-out cherub and the con artist unicorn and the time god who is a baby. A great many of Gravity Falls monsters never appear on screen at all. They live only in the journals, and in the real book Gravity Falls eventually published, called Journal 3, released in 2016 after the series ended. That book is the physical version of the Prop Dipper Carries All series, and it is where you find the rest of the Bestiary, the creatures the 40 episodes never had time for. Some of them are wonderful. There is the abominable Broman, which is a Bigfoot in a muscle shirt, whose entire vocabulary is bro, righteous, and chill out. A Sasquatch reimagined as a beach dude. There is the stomach-faced duck, exactly as unpleasant as it sounds. There's the platypus and scampfires and question quails and barf fairies, a whole zoo of small, absurd horrors that Ford supposedly cataloged and the show simply never had room to animate. Journal 3 was co-written with a supervising producer named Rob Renzetti, and the reason it exists at all is a genuinely moving one. The finale left a huge amount of Ford's story untold, specifically the 30 years he spent lost, drifting alone through the multiverse after the portal accident, dimension after dimension. Hirsch and the crew could never find a way to fit that vast journey into a series that was, at its heart, about one summer for two kids, so the book became the vessel for it. Journal 3 let them finally write down what Ford saw out there, the material they loved but could never squeeze onto the screen, and that is why the book reads less like merchandise and more like the missing half of the show. The physical book has a secret layer that folds right back into the monster episodes. Parts of Journal 3 are printed in invisible ink, readable only under a black light, and what those hidden passages reveal is remarkable. Under ultraviolet, the journal spells out the secret weakness of the zombies, the very same invisible ink trick the episode Scary OK used, so the book and the episode share a hidden language. And in another blacklight note, next to the entry on the giant floating stone head from one of its monster episodes, Ford has written that the enormous disembodied Stone Island head is, of all things, a family man. A colossal, ancient monolith with a face, and the secret truth about him hidden in ink you need a special lamp to see, is that he has a family he loves. That is Gravity Falls in one buried joke, a terrifying thing that turns out to have a tender inner life, written so small and so hidden that most owners of the book will never find it. The journals also let Gravity Falls, quote, real cryptid folklore straight, and the clearest example is Mothman, who appears in Journal 3 as a proper cryptid entry. Mothman is not invented for the show. He is one of the most famous American cryptids based on a real wave of sightings in and around Point Pleasant, West Virginia, reported between November of 1966 and December of 1967. A winged, man-shaped creature with glowing red eyes that locals blamed for a coming disaster. By putting Mothman in the journal, Gravity Falls plants its fictional bestiary firmly in the same soil as real American monster legend, treating its own gnomes and shapeshifters as members of the same family as the cryptids people genuinely claim to have seen. Then there are the creatures that are basically puns given a heartbeat. The leprechaun is a journal creature, an interbred leprechaun and unicorn that sheds plastic gold coins and whose horn endlessly loops the tune of Danny Boy, a monster that is entirely a groan of a joke and all the better for it. And out in the actual episodes, in the background, Gravity Falls keeps a stable of small, recurring, not-quite monsters, chief among them Gompers, the goat who hangs around the mystery shack eating tin cans and anything else metal. Gompers looks like set dressing, but he is a deep-cut gag with real payoffs. In one episode, his license plate habit reportedly gets an innocent bystander arrested. In another, the Love God episode, Mabel's matchmaking spree ends with her officiating a kind of wedding between Gompers the goat and Waddles the pig. The goat is a running joke the writers tended carefully across 2 seasons, the same patience they gave the wax head in the vents, because in this show even the goat has a through line. There's also a whole population of small creatures the show keeps in its peripheral vision, the ones you catch in a corner and never get a full episode about. There are the floating eyeballs, free-drifting disembodied eyes that first appear glimpsed in a car during the convenience store haunting and then turn up again during the zombie siege. A recurring reminder that Gravity Falls is a town where something is always looking at you. There are fairies, tiny winged things that flit at the edges of the frame, one of which Suze casually swats out of the air in the dinosaur episode without a second thought, before they reappear in the chaos of the finale. And there are the Manotaur-adjacent oddities, the golf ball-headed factions, the Cyclops octopus, the swarm of living hands, all the one-scene wonders the journals would list and the episodes barely pause on. Individually, none of them carry a story. Together, they do something more important. They make the world feel overstuffed, overpopulated, teeming just past the edge of what you are being shown, so that Gravity Falls never feels like a set with 3 monsters on it, but like an entire ecosystem you're only ever seeing a sliver of. That density is a choice, and it is expensive, and Gravity Falls made it anyway, because a forest that is only haunted where the plot needs it to be is not really haunted at all. What I find worth sitting with about the journal-only monsters is that they change the size of the world. The episodes you watch have maybe a few dozen creatures. The world implied by the journals has 150 and more, most of them glimpsed only as a sketch and a paragraph in Ford's cramped handwriting. Gravity Falls is built to feel like it goes on past the edges of the screen, like the forest is full of things the camera simply never turned toward, and the books are the proof that the creators actually did the work of imagining them, not as a plot device, but because a place is only truly haunted if it is haunted even where no one is looking. And now we come to the end, and to the monster all the others were building toward. Weirdmageddon is the three-part finale, and it is the moment Bill Cipher stops being a trickster in a dream and becomes a god in the daylight. He gets his way in because of a small tear in reality called the Rift, which is not the same thing as the great portal Ford built, but a separate crack. And Bill tricks Mabel into handing it over at her lowest moment and cracks it open. Reality splits, the sky turns to fire and stone, and Bill and his court pour through into the physical town of Gravity Falls. The first thing he does tells you everything. The Time Baby, that supposedly all-powerful cosmic ruler of time, the god of the future arena, shows up to stop the apocalypse, and Bill destroys him in a single blow, obliterates him instantly, before the Time Baby can even finish a sentence. The show spent 2 seasons making the Time Baby seem unbeatable so that it could erase him in one shot and make you understand, in 1 second, that Bill is playing on a level nothing else in the series can reach. Every other monster tonight had a weakness you could name: a mirror, a song, a leaf blower, sunlight, water. Bill has none you can reach with your hands. To understand what Bill actually is, you have to go beyond the episodes to the book Hirsch published in 2024 called The Book of Bill, because that is where the demon's origin finally gets written down. Bill is not a ghost or a spirit. He is a 2-dimensional being, a creature from a flat world, a dimension of pure geometry called Euclidia. And his entire biology is a direct homage to a real 19th-century novella. In 1884, an English schoolmaster named Edwin Abbott wrote a book called Flatland about a world of 2 dimensions inhabited by living squares and triangles and circles who cannot conceive of a 3rd dimension until one of them is shown it and is broken open by the knowledge. Bill Cipher is a Flatland creature. He was born in a flat world with a mutation, an abnormally large single eye, and that eye let him perceive the 3rd dimension, let him see up, the thing none of his kind could see. And what he did with that gift, according to the book, is the darkest thing in all of Gravity Falls. He destroyed his own home dimension. He wiped out Euclidia and everyone in it, including his own parents, named Scalene and Euclid, an act encoded in a hidden cipher in the book that reads that his dimension is now deceased and that Scalene and Euclid rest in peace. He claims to be over 1 trillion years old, and he has been drifting between dimensions ever since he killed his first one, looking for a way to do it again. His rules matter because the show plays fair with him right up to the end. Bill's reality warping power is native to the mindscape, to dreams and minds, not to the solid physical world. He cannot simply reshape reality by wanting to. He needed the rift to get a foothold in 3 dimensions at all, and even during Weirdmageddon, at the height of his power, his weirdness is trapped inside an invisible barrier around the Valley of Gravity Falls, a bubble he personally cannot cross, which is the whole reason the apocalypse does not immediately spread across the planet, and the whole reason he is so desperate to break out. The god has a fence around him, and he knows it. Bill does not come alone. He brings his court, a gang of interdimensional criminals from the nightmare dimension known as the Henchmaniacs, and they are a rogues gallery of one-eyed geometric horrors. There is Pyronica, a demon of pink flame. There is 8-Ball with the head of a billiard 8-ball. There is Kryptos, a square one-eyed creature who is essentially a cheaper knockoff of Bill himself. There is Teeth, which is simply a set of enormous walking chattering teeth. There is Hectorgon, a hexagon and keyhole, and Pacifier, a fire demon sucking a pacifier. And there is Xanthar, the largest of them, a huge lumbering behemoth referred to as the being whose name must never be said. And here's the joke buried in the design. Xanthar, this enormous, unspeakable dread beast, is deliberately shaped like a loaf of bread. His face is a slice of bread, and he walks on gorilla legs, and the animators built him that way on purpose to be the odd one out among Bill's demons, the terrifying entity who is secretly a baked good. Even at the literal end of the world, Gravity Falls could not resist hiding one more gag in a monster. And these demons are not simply background either. Pyronica and 8-Ball and the rest are given personalities, party habits, little rivalries, a whole social life for a gang of apocalypse creatures lounging in the ruins of a town, so that when Bill finally falls, their end lands too. With their master gone, the hench maniacs are scattered and banished back toward the nightmare dimension they crawled out of, some of them smashed apart by the Shacktron in the final fight, the party ending as abruptly as it began. They are monsters built to make the end of the world feel like a house party thrown by things that should not exist, and that tonal trick, horror playing as a celebration, is a lot of why Weirdmageddon still unsettles people who first saw it as children and now watch it as adults. Bill's foot soldiers are the eye bats, flying creatures that are just a single eyeball with bat wings, and their power is lifted straight from Greek myth. Their gaze petrifies. Like the Gorgon Medusa, an eye bat can look at a fleeing townsperson and turn them instantly to stone, and Bill uses them to round up the population of Gravity Falls, freezing the people into statues. And then he does the most disturbing thing a Disney cartoon has arguably ever shown. He builds a throne out of them. Bill's seat during Weirdmageddon is a throne of frozen human agony, a chair constructed from the petrified, screaming bodies of real townspeople, their faces locked in horror, stacked into furniture for a triangle to lounge on. That imagery pushed hard against the limits of what the network would allow. A children's show building its villain a throne out of the tortured bodies of its own characters. The throne has a weakness written into it, though. It is held up by one load-bearing human, a man named Tyler. And when the resistance yanks Tyler out from the bottom, the whole throne of bodies collapses. The people frozen into that throne and all across the town are restored to flesh once Bill is finally beaten. The way the town fights back is by turning the Mystery Shack itself into a giant robot, the Shacktron, welded together by McGucket and the survivors. And it is a monument to everything the series had planted. Its parts are old monsters and old episodes given a second life. One forearm is the amber-encased Tyrannosaurus from the Land Before Swine caverns. The tail is built from the neck of the Gobblewonker robot, McGucket's fake lake serpent from the second episode, finally useful. Ford coats the whole machine in the unicorn hair spell, the same hair Mabel tore off Celestabel Bethabel, to make it immune to Bill's magic. And crewing its many periscopes, watching every direction at once with all his eyes, is the Multi-Bear. The creature Dipper refused to kill on the mountain. The final battle is fought by a robot made of the show's own Bestiary. Every monster you have heard about tonight is, in some sense, standing inside that mech. There was going to be a musical number in here that got cut. For Weirdmageddon, a big Bill Cipher song was written called It's Gonna Get Weird, and it was written by Neil Cicierega, the internet musician behind Lemon Demon, and the old viral song, The Ultimate Showdown of Ultimate Destiny. It was cut for time, never animated, and Cicierega later posted the demo, the version with his placeholder lyrics, on his own Tumblr in the spring of 2016, so a full Bill Cipher villain song exists in the world, sung by its writer, that never made it into the apocalypse it was written for. And there is a small calendar oddity attached to this finale too. The 3-part Weirdmageddon arc was later stitched together into a single feature-length movie edit, and that combined version premiered on Disney XD on the 29th of February 2016, so its grand ending got a broadcast that only exists at all because of a leap year, an extra day that the calendar coughs up once every 4 years, handed to a monster. The deleted material around the finale hides one of the strangest facts about Bill, and it is one of the 5 I most wanted to reach tonight. Some cut storyboards from Weirdmageddon reportedly show that Bill Cipher has a tongue. In one deleted beat, Ford spits into Bill's giant eye, and Bill calmly licks it clean, which means somewhere in the production's own records is proof that the flat triangle demon has a working tongue inside that single eye. And in another cut moment, Bill, being Bill, romantically ships 2 objects together, pairing the frozen golden statue of Ford with a deer, playing matchmaker for a metal corpse and a woodland animal for his own amusement. These are the jokes too odd and too dark to make the final cut, but they are on the record, and they tell you how loose and strange the writer's room got when they were drawing the apocalypse. There is a monster in this finale you have almost certainly heard, without hearing the voice that was first recorded for it, and this is genuinely one of the stranger production facts in the whole series. Among the creatures of Weirdmageddon is one called the horrifying, sweaty, one-armed monstrosity, and its lines were originally recorded by the comedian Louis C.K. In 2017, after CK admitted to sexual misconduct, Disney quietly went back and re-recorded every one of that monster's lines with Alex Hirsch's own voice, scrubbing the original performance out entirely. So every version of the finale that has aired or streamed since late 2017 contains a monster that has been secretly revoiced, its first performer erased and replaced. In a show about a memory gun that wipes people out of the record, the finale itself got a real-world memory wipe, one voice removed and written over, and most viewers have no idea the swap ever happened. And then Bill dies, and how he dies is the single fact people most often get wrong, so let me be careful with it. There is a prophecy, a zodiac wheel of 10 symbols, 10 people who must join hands to summon a power that can destroy Bill. The wheel fails. It fails specifically because Stan and Ford, the two brothers, are still feuding, still cannot stand to touch each other, and their broken bond snaps the circle, and Bill gleefully burns the wheel to ash. So the family finds another way, and it costs them terribly. Stan and Ford swap clothes and identities to fool the demon. Bill, thinking he is dealing with Ford, is lured into a mind, invited in, but the mind is not Ford's. It is Stan's, and Stan volunteered for this, knowing what it would do to him. With Bill trapped inside Stan's head, Ford fires the memory gun, the device that erases minds, directly into his brother's mind, destroying Bill along with everything Stan is. Inside that collapsing mindscape, as he burns away, Bill realizes too late what has happened, and Stan's own mental self hauls off and punches him as the demon disintegrates. It was Ford who pulled the trigger. It was Stan who offered his own mind as the trap. Stan does not die, but every memory he has is wiped clean, his whole life erased to kill the triangle hiding inside it. That is not where the family leaves him. In the aftermath, with Stan a blank, remembering nothing and no one, it is Mabel who brings him back, using her summer scrapbook, the photo album she kept all season, showing him picture after picture until the man begins, slowly, to remember who he is. With Waddles the pig helping to trigger the first spark of recognition, Stan comes back. And the device that did it, the memory gun, invented by Fiddleford McGucket, after he saw too much through the portal, the same weapon that hollowed out an entire town, is destroyed for good by Mabel on the twins' 13th birthday, so that no one can ever again erase what the summer was. She smashes the gun precisely so that she will never forget. So Bill is dead. In the finale, as the demon burns out of existence inside Stan's mind, his body in the physical world petrifies, hardens, and drops into the forest as a gray stone statue, a triangle frozen mid-scream in the dirt. The show ends with that statue, and then, in a live-action post-credits shot, the real world gets a real statue too, a physical Bill Cipher standing in an actual forest, which became the seed of a real event I will come back to in a moment. For years, that was the ending. Bill destroyed, petrified, over. Then, in 2024, the Book of Bill rewrote his death. According to the book, as Bill was being erased inside Stan's mind, in his final instant, he cried out to a godlike being called the Axolotl, begging for another chance, and the Axolotl answered. Instead of ceasing to exist, Bill was pulled out and sent to a place called the Theraprism, a kind of cosmic mental asylum outside space and time, a rehabilitation prison where broken interdimensional entities are held for what the book calls indefinite karmic rehabilitation, until they genuinely atone for what they have done. Only then would Bill be released, reincarnated as some simpler, harmless form of life. And the crucial thing, the thing that keeps him a monster, is that he has not reformed. The Book of Bill makes clear he is still in there, still unrepentant, still himself, doing his sentence without ever meaning a word of the apology. So the honest answer to whether Bill Cipher is dead is that in the show he is destroyed and turned to stone, and in the book he survived, imprisoned forever in a cosmic asylum, unrepentant, waiting. The Axolotl deserves a second look because the name is not gentle at all. In the show and the book, the Axolotl is presented as a serene, cosmic, almost benevolent savior, the being that decides Bill's fate. But the name traces back to the Aztec god Xolotl, and Xolotl is a far darker figure. He was a dog-headed god of fire and lightning, of twins, and of misfortune and bad luck, and he served as a psychopomp, a guide who led the dead down into the underworld. He was the monstrous twin of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. So the merciful cosmic amphibian that grants Bill his second chance is named for an Aztec death god of twins and misfortune, which is either a coincidence or exactly the kind of buried, load-bearing reference this show never stopped planting. Given everything else we have talked about tonight, I know which one I believe. The finale that ended all of this set a record. Weirdmageddon Part 3, called Take Back the Falls, aired in February of 2016 and drew close to 2.5 million viewers, the most watched telecast in the history of Disney XD, and the record it broke had been set by another Gravity Falls episode, the one that finally explained the two Stan brothers. Gravity Falls dethroned itself. And listen for one last piece of casting in the aftermath at the very end when the summer is over. There is a small, often repeated bit of fan trivia that the bus driver who carries Dipper and Mabel out of Gravity Falls and back toward their ordinary lives shares a voice actor with Twin Peaks, the strange small-town mystery that inspired this whole series. Fans have long speculated that Hirsch tried and failed to land David Lynch himself for the show, and that this small casting choice was meant as a farewell salute to the thing Gravity Falls loved most. The last new voice you hear in the series belongs to the ghost of its biggest influence. There is one more kind of monster in Gravity Falls that I have been circling all night, and it is the kind the characters make themselves, and it might be the truest kind it has. Think about how many of these creatures are not found in the woods, but manufactured out of somebody's need. The Gobblewonker is a robot, a lonely man built to be seen. The wax figures are a museum, a neglectful man built and then abandoned. The Dipper clones are copies a stressed boy made because he could not be in two places at once. GIFfany is a girlfriend a lonely man fell for because she could not leave. And in the second-to-last episode, when the world is ending and Mabel cannot face it, she retreats into a bubble of pure fantasy called Mabeland. And inside it, she builds herself a replacement brother. She makes Dippy Fresh, a smiling, skateboarding, high-fiving, agreeable version of Dipper, who never argues with her and never wants to grow up and leave. Dippy Fresh is a monster made of denial, a person conjured to avoid the pain of a real person changing. He is unsettling precisely because he is so pleasant. The real Dipper is complicated and is starting to want his own life, and so Mabel builds a fake one who never will, and Gravity Falls treats that manufactured, agreeable copy as one of its quietest horrors. That is the thread that ties this whole bestiary together, and it is why the monsters land harder than the plots they live in. Over and over, the scariest thing in Gravity Falls is not the creature that crawled out of the ground. It is the thing a lonely or frightened person built to fill a hole in themselves and then lost control of. The gnomes wanted a queen. The trickster punished anyone who rejected it. Bill wanted to never be alone in his flat little world and burned that world down. Even the memory gun, the object at the dead center of it all, is a machine a broken man built to escape a truth he could not carry. Gravity Falls keeps handing its characters an easy way out, a fake monster, a copied friend, a wiped memory, and then showing them gently but firmly that the way out is the actual danger, and the only cure is to stay and face the real thing, the real brother, the real ending, the real summer that has to end. Step back and look at the whole collection, and you see what the writers were actually doing. This bestiary is a deliberate anthology of the world's folklore, assembled with real care. The hide behind is genuine lumberjack lore from the very forests it is set in. The Gremloblin is the aviator's gremlin crossed with a horror movie rule. The Gobblewonker is Loch Ness and Ogopogo. The Manotaurs are the Greek Minotaur. The Lilliputtians are Swift's Lilliputians. Darlene is the Japanese Joragumo. The unicorn is the medieval maiden legend turned inside out. Summerween is Celtic Samhain. The Time Baby is a centuries-old confusion of two Greek gods. The Axolotl is an Aztec death deity. Bill himself is a 19th-century novella about a flat world given a top hat and a grudge. Somebody sat down and built a monster for every corner of human storytelling and then hid a real joke, a real reference, or a real piece of grief inside each one. That is not a coincidence, and it is not lazy. It is a love letter to every story humans have ever told about the things in the dark. folded into a cartoon about two kids and their great uncle in a shack in the Oregon woods. Before we drift toward the end, two of its most important monsters walk on two legs and were born human, and they belong in any honest bestiary. The first is Gideon. Lil Gideon Gleeful is a small, round, angelic-looking child with an enormous puff of white hair, a fake psychic act, and a genuine talent for menace. For a stretch of the first season, he is the closest thing it has to a main villain, obsessed with Mabel, obsessed with the Mystery Shack, and armed with a real supernatural weapon, a green gem called the Mystic Amulet that gives him telekinesis, the power to lift and throw people and objects with his mind. Gideon is a monster in the shape of a spoiled boy, and Gravity Falls never lets his cuteness soften what he is. The amulet, worth being precise about because it is a common thing to get wrong, is not destroyed at the climax of Gideon's big finale. It is destroyed earlier than that by Mabel in the episode where Gideon first tries to win her, when she cracks the gem and cuts off his power. What makes Gideon matter to this whole story, though, is the door he opens. Gideon is the one who first reaches out to Bill Cipher, drawing the summoning circle, making the deal, inviting the dream demon into the story. The child villain is the hinge the real monster swings in on. The second human monster is not a person at all, but a society, and it is the quiet engine under half the mysteries we have talked about. The Society of the Blind Eye is a secret order in Gravity Falls dedicated to erasing memories, using McGucket's memory gun to wipe away any encounter with the supernatural, keeping the town placid and forgetful, its residents smiling and blank about the horrors in their own woods. This is the truest monster in the whole series because it is the one that looks most like kindness. The Society believes it is helping. It thinks forgetting the monster is the same as being safe from it. And Gravity Falls, from its very first frame to its last, argues the exact opposite. It argues that the forgetting is the wound, that a memory gun is a weapon even when it is pointed at pain, that the summer has to be remembered precisely because it hurt to have it end. When Mabel smashes the memory gun at the end, she is killing the last monster, the one that promised everyone they could stop feeling things if they just let it erase the record. Gravity Falls spends 40 episodes cataloging gnomes and ghosts and shapeshifters, and then quietly tells you that the scariest thing in town was always the machine that made you forget them. There is a layer wrapped around all of these monsters that I have been touching all night and want to gather up before we finish, because it is the thing that turned a good cartoon into an obsession, and it is its real signature. Gravity Falls is built on codes. Nearly every episode ends with a scrambled cryptogram under the credits, and it trains you slowly and deliberately to break them. In the beginning, the ciphers are gentle, simple letter substitutions you can solve at the kitchen table, a Caesar shift that slides the alphabet along by a few letters, an @bash that flips it end to end, an A1Z26 code that just swaps each letter for its number. It teaches you these one at a time like a patient tutor, and rewards you with a little joke or a small secret for your trouble. And then, right when you have grown comfortable, it raises the difficulty, exactly the way it raises the danger of its monsters. Starting with the zombie episode, the credits switch to the keyed Visionaire cipher, the harder code we talked about, the one where you cannot decode the message until you have first hunted down a secret keyword hidden somewhere in the artwork of the episode itself. Suddenly solving the cipher requires watching the monster, staring at the set, reading the writing on a jail cell wall or the side of a tiny castle. The code and the creature became the same puzzle. Later it reaches for binary and other systems, and it hides messages backwards in its own theme song, so that even the 30 seconds you skip on every rewatch contained instructions if you played them in reverse. Nothing was ever only decoration. The wallpaper had things to say. The obsession leaked out past the episodes too. A tie-in video game released alongside it, a little browser fighting game, hid its own cryptogram, and when fans decoded it, the message was a warning in Bill Cipher's voice, promising that he would be returning to Gravity Falls. Gravity Falls was seeding its final villain not just in the rug and the window, but in the marketing and the merchandise, in a throwaway flash game, betting that somebody obsessive enough would find it and light the fuse of speculation early. This is the atmosphere the monsters lived inside, a world where every symbol might be a clue, where the pupils of a stone statue or the pattern on a creature's skin might resolve into a sentence if you looked hard enough. It is why a show about gnomes and ghosts produced a fandom that behaves like a code-breaking unit. Hirsch did not only write monsters, he wrote a text that had to be excavated, and he trusted a generation of kids and the adults they became to do the digging. It is worth remembering how unusual that trust was for a network aimed at children, a show that assumed its youngest viewers were smart, patient, and hungry for something to solve, and rewarded them for it instead of talking down to them. The monsters were the bait, the codes were the hook, and the thing underneath, the reason people stayed, was the feeling that Gravity Falls believed you could handle the dark stuff, the loss and the grief and the endings if it wrapped them in a good enough mystery. Once you understand that, you understand why the whole thing ends the way it does, with the monsters spilling out of the screen entirely. The monsters did not stay on the screen. When Gravity Falls ended, its biggest creature walked out into the real world twice over. The live-action tag left a real, physical Bill Cipher statue standing in an actual Oregon forest. And in the summer of 2016, a few months after the finale, Alex Hirsch turned finding it into a real event. The Cipher Hunt was a global scavenger hunt running about 13 days from the 20th of July to the 2nd of August in 2016 that Hirsch ran together with its art director Ian Worrell, sending thousands of fans chasing clues across Japan and Russia and the United States, decoding ciphers and following coordinates, exactly the way Dipper follows the journals. At the end of it, the physical Bill statue was found in a forest near Reedsport, Oregon, and it was eventually moved to a roadside attraction called Confusion Hill in Piercy, California, where it still stands today, with a treasure chest buried beneath it. The final mystery of Gravity Falls was one the audience had to solve with their own feet in the real forest, and the prize was the monster itself, turned to stone. Just as the finale promised, that location is not a random one, and it closes a loop that runs all the way back to the beginning. The Mystery Shack, with its tilted rooms and its gags about gravity behaving strangely, was based on two real roadside attractions that Hirsch knew as a kid. One is the Oregon Vortex, also called the House of Mystery, near Gold Hill, Oregon. The other is Confusion Hill in Piercy, California, the very place the real Bill statue ended up. So the tourist trap that inspired the whole show became the final resting place of its greatest monster. The fake mystery house at the start and the petrified demon at the end are standing in the real world on the same patch of ground. Gravity Falls was never canceled. Hirsch ended it himself on purpose, and he was firm about the difference, saying that finishing it was 100% his own choice, something he had decided a very long time before, because he had always designed Gravity Falls to be a finite story about one single, unrepeatable summer. He did not want it to run forever and rot. He wanted it to end while it still meant something, the way a summer ends, the way childhood ends, whether you are ready or not. And the people who built these monsters scattered and went on to build whole worlds of their own. The crew of this one cartoon became a kind of factory of showrunners. Matt Braley went on to make Amphibia. Dana Terrace made The Owl House. Shion Takeuchi made Inside Job, where Bill Cipher himself even sneaks a cameo. It ended, but the imagination that filled its woods with careful, loving, folklore-rooted monsters simply moved into new forests. So that is every monster, or near enough, the whole strange bestiary of Gravity Falls, from the gnomes in the first minute to the triangle in the burning sky. What stays with me, after all of it, is how much care went into things most viewers would never consciously notice. The real folklore under each creature, the joke hidden in a monster's mouth, the promise buried in a cipher and kept 2 years later, the whole world that keeps going in the woods even where the camera never turns to look. Gravity Falls treated a children's cartoon as if every single frame of it mattered, as if a bored kid pausing on the right image deserved a real secret waiting there. That is a rare kind of respect for an audience, and it is why people are still out there tonight, a decade later, decoding the credits and arguing about the wax head in the vents and standing in a California forest taking pictures of a stone triangle. The summer ended, but the mystery did not, and I think it was always meant to stay a little bit unsolved so that we would keep coming back to the woods. Thank you for spending this long, quiet stretch of the night here with me. drifting through the monsters of Gravity Falls. If your eyes are heavy by now, that is exactly the idea. So let the pines and the fog and the little glowing eyes in the dark carry you the rest of the way down. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.